That's because it's recording on my computer and
Oh, okay.
but I'd rather Mark record it on his computer because he's better
I can get it.
connected to
I'll
Velvet
get it.
than I am.
I'll get it to Velvet. So I think I got it now, Tim. So
Okay. Yep, you do.
Okay.
Before we begin, it might be that Catherine wants to address privilege of the floor, and if that's the case, you can do so, Catherine.
Hi, thanks. No, really, just we're here to listen. It sounded like a content-full agenda, so that's why we're here.
Wrap
I
here.
don't have anything to say other than thanks for everything you're doing, and I can't wait to hear from Greg.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Craig Modisher is joining us. We're getting quite a crowd tonight.
Your agenda was exciting. What can we say?
I thought it was my personal email was exciting that got sent out with the agenda. Luckily, I didn't say very much. Craig, you're connecting to audio. If you're here to address privilege of the floor, now is the time to do so. But if you're here just to look and admire, you can do that too. And I hear nothing else. So why don't we begin? So as I mentioned to you through the email, well, first of all, Yusman, you wanted to address communications.
Oh, yeah. Is that okay? I mean, I feel that the traffic of the message is like become intense right now. I don't know how long it will be. I think until January or February, something like that. And then it is really hard for us to discuss or to follow when we change a subject or something like that. So I suggest that we set a electronic mailing list, which is just whenever we change subject or send email to everybody, we just like send to one email address. And I don't know what is the policy here. Maybe the town of Coron must do the setting up. I don't know.
Mark, is that something that you think Velvet could help us with? I don't know if we've done that before or not.
Yeah.
We can look into it.
Yeah, we can look into it. I think this should be
our email system is really wonky and frustrating. I mean, I know that it takes forever to find something back in, but we'll look into it because it does have to be done through the town.
Okay. I'd be happy to help if
thanks.
If allowed. Okay.
Just one suggestion. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So one thing that would be helpful is if people change the subject of an email when they change the subject of the email. So sometimes people reply to something that's about, design guidelines and they start talking about some other issues. So one way to help categorize is just make sure your subject is clear and pertains to the email you're actually sending. That often helps.
Yes, thanks. That's a very good suggestion. And Ellen?
Janice Burton just joined us. You might want to ask if she wants to speak privilege of the floor.
And then we're going to cut off privilege of the floor after this so we can get going. Janice, if you just joined us and we're here for privilege of the floor, would you like to say something before we get going?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
No, I'm just here to observe. Thank you.
Okay, great. Welcome. Nice not to see you. See a flower. So as I mentioned in the email, the subcommittee for design standards has done a tremendous amount of work as we appreciated last week. Submitted a revised document with some revisions as well of site review plan to Greg. Greg was able to parse them out and has helped us understand what might belong and what document and what the stratifications should be. So we thought it would be helpful at this stage to take a pause, have Greg help us review that. It might also just be a good moment also to think back on our charge. And then what we're going to propose for the rest of the evening, probably after half an hour or so, is for then the subcommittee to to meet separately with me and Mark just to try to, and Greg, to make ground in finalizing this document so that next week we can formally review it as a group. Does that make sense to everyone?
Mhm.
So why don't I just turn it over to Greg for now?
Sure. Thank you, Tim.
Greg has been prepared that this is what we're going to do.
Yes. Yeah. So for those of you who are familiar with the site plan review law and design guidelines currently adopted by Caroline, there was discussion in the last few weeks about maybe revising both of those documents and kind of how to go about that process. And so, the conversation started with maybe there should be certain thresholds of development being revised in the site plan review law. Maybe there should be certain types of uses that are added into the site plan review law in order to be to go through that process. And then maybe we should take a look at the design guidelines and make them a little bit stronger with a little bit more teeth to them. So from that, the subcommittee presented suggestions, heard from the group about additional things to add to the site plan review law or amend, and then went through the design guidelines to make them a little bit stronger. I then went through both documents and kind of held them together, and I made my own judgment of what should be included in the site plan review law versus what should be included in the supplemental document now proposed to be called design standards. And I think it's worth mentioning that, so we learned through, during the week, we learned that the design guidelines were adopted as a resolution by the town, meaning that there was no necessarily public hearing on them. So when the town adopted their site plan review law first in 2014, it had to go through a public hearing process. And then in 2018, there was an update to those to that law. And it looks like, without going back in time, or if anybody else was around then to maybe comment on the process, it looks like that extra design guidelines were suggested for the town, and they were added as part of a necessary step for site plan review. And the guidelines are in question format, so they are very discretionary to have the site plan review board sort of have some sort of set of questions to be asking a development proposal. So, thinking about kind of how to move forward, hearing everything from the group about changing certain types of development to go through the site plan, as well as maybe strengthening some of the standards. I think when all is said and done, I was thinking before this meeting about how to sort of present this, and they could both be in the same law. And so again, I think that having this separate design guideline manual was just used as a basis to have a set of questions that were just adopted as a resolution and added to the amended 2018 site plan. So what am I getting at? I guess, Mark, did you have a follow-up on that? And
Mark,
you're muted, Mark.
My computer just told me that I was muted. Sorry about that. Yeah, Greg, I will follow up here real quickly. In the previous version of the site plan review law, the design guidelines were part of the law. And then when we revised the site plan and subdivision review laws in 2018, we intentionally cut them out in order that they could be revised periodically if the town board saw the need to do that. And I recently followed up with Guy, our town attorney, about that. And I think Barb Newth asked a question the other day by email about, whether that matters, whether they're in the law or they're separate as a separate document. And he did point out that either way, they are referenced in the law, that the review board shall, I can't cite the exact language, but I did look it up today. So the design guidelines are cited in the law, and the review board can hold a developer to those design guidelines. So I just wanted to explain why we decided to separate them so that they were more nimble and could be changed without changing a law. So
great. Yeah, thank you, Mark, for providing that context about that. That was my assumption, but I didn't want to assume that. But that is that resolution could be. Oh, so it looks like Barb has a question.
Barb has a question.
Yeah, thanks. Mark, just a follow-up on that. So the task force and the work that we've been doing and the subcommittee charged to look at the guidelines, the current guidelines, and the site plan review law are on the verge of recommending that the current language of guidelines written as questions be changed to standards written as statements.
Mm-hmm.
So would that, since that's referenced in the law, in the current law as guidelines, would that require a change in the law? I'm assuming it would, to refer to standards if the guidelines document of questions changes to a standards document of statements. Is that correct?
I would suppose that if the name of the design guidelines was changed like that we would want to amend the local law accordingly. And maybe Greg knows more about this than I do, but so yeah, that the reply that I got from Guy was that they are that they are guidelines, but the review board is authorized to apply those guidelines either way, whether they're in the local law or separate. So,
Ellen?
I have to ask, what do you mean by apply the guidelines? So if the guideline says the developer must assess the impact on agricultural resources,
mm-hmm.
What does it mean to hold them to that? Just that they have to look at it? Or can we because I'm on the review board, we don't think they're adhering to the guidelines, therefore we're denying a permit. I mean, that's where the guidelines as written are just questions. Are you looking at this? Rather than you got to do it. And so our subcommittee and the task force has been discussing changing take a look at agricultural impacts to you must not or must yes do something. You understand what I'm saying? And
yeah,
so you can call them what you want, but if they're, what is a guideline or as opposed to a requirement?
So I'm looking at the design guidelines now, and so I'll just let's see. I'll pick out an example. So here's one, for example. So has the proposed development utilized best practices in its design of building envelopes, foundations, walls, windows that will minimize heating and cooling costs, including but not limited to using 20% more insulation, cellulose and spray foam preferred, than required by current energy code, implementing window to wall ratios of less than 25%, and minimizing window placements in low occupancy area, avoiding unusually complex building shapes, minimizing infiltration and stack effects results to maximize the overall thermal energy performance of buildings in this region of New York State. So that was a complicated statement that, you know, did have some quantitative parameters in there. So I think, you know, these guidelines under current site plan review law are something that the review board could hold the developer to.
Irene happens to be here, and she was on the board, unlike me, when these were passed. So, and I think she has just
Yeah, I do have something to add, and it's an important distinction that we had quite a bit of discussion with Guy about to try and come to understanding. As I recall, there's a difference, and I believe, honestly, I don't have the site plan review law in front of me. I haven't looked at it in a while, but to my recollection, there's sort of two groups of guidelines, if you will, and some of the guidelines are supported by existing local law or state law. And for those, when there's a basis in law to hold the developer to those, then they can be held to upholding those guidelines. There are other guidelines that are not upheld anywhere in either state law or town law. And as a result, those are intended for discussion. And I think that within, you know, at some point I remember we went through and we identified which ones were part of existing law and which ones were intended for discussion. And I think that we somehow incorporated that into the site plan review law or into the guide. No, Ellen's shaking her head no.
Well, there were some things in the site plan review law that are very clear standards. You got to do this, you got to do that. That's in the law.
Right.
I think you're right, but in terms of the guidelines, there are some of them that, like the one Mark quoted, which is quite prescriptive.
Right, but it's also aspirational. It's prescriptive but aspirational, because there's no basis in town law or state law to require that. And so the intent is to, within the review board process, the review board has very limited authority, as I understand it, to reject a proposal unless laws aren't being abided by, but also that there are ways in which there can also be, if enough of the more aspirational things, if there's no compliance and no give and no willingness to work with the town, it provides a little more basis for rejection. But it's yeah, you're making that face, Ellen, because it's kind of fuzzy. It's, you know, unless it's backed up by existing law, it can't be fully required. But what it is intended is to at least provide the aspirations of the town and to encourage a conversation and a negotiation between the review board and the developer to be cooperative and to, you know, blend in with the town in whatever ways are you know, advised in the guidelines.
Yeah, I think this is probably something, I don't know, do you have anything to add, Greg, to this?
Well, I was just, I was going to follow up with Ellen's, or no, sorry, with Irene's point, and when you brought up that certain design guideline, which was a yes or no question, it was, you know, it was asking about certain insulation, and it was yes, you're going to do this, or no, aren't you? I guess my question then, because of what Irene just said, is that I don't know if that is in a local law. So what if the answer was no, we are not providing that insulation to meet that requirement? Could the site plan review board say, okay, we're not going to approve this site plan? But it sounds like that they couldn't. And I think that was what Ellen maybe was asking about, these questions that if the developer says, no, we're not going to meet that, then
So,
okay.
sorry if I can add one more piece. Part of the impetus for revising the site plan review law and the design guidelines is that the county had come out with new criteria within the county for their 239 review. The 239 review is typically something that happens after a whole project has been, talked about and vetted. It's kind of the last thing you do as a town before you green light something, is you send it to the county and ask the county to review it. And the problem with that is that it's way too late. All the decisions have been made, the negotiations have happened, the conversations have happened, and it happens way too late in the process. And so the intent in what we did with the revision of the site plan law and the guidelines is to take the requirements of the county's 239 review law and incorporate them into a conversation up front. And honestly, again, it's been a while since I've looked at this stuff. I'm not certain whether the criteria that are part of the county's 239 review are in fact laws or recommendations of the county. So we could, probably look into that and see. Here's what I found.
Greg?
No. Sorry, go on, Ellen.
Greg, can you just clarify that or not?
Well, no, I was just writing down that I want to look up if the county has specific 239 related laws, because I staff the 239 review board for Cayuga County, and we certainly don't have any particular county laws that pertain to any local site developments. We are looking for intermunicipal concern. And often our response back for site developments is this has no intermunicipal concern. But if Tompkins County has specific laws that they require their 239 review to also adhere to, that would be something that I could look up. So I've just sort of marked that down to look into.
Ellen?
So 2 things. One is, I found myself on the review board that, the second guideline is, quote, is the proposed development consistent with the town's comprehensive plan? And in a case, I thought, no, it is not. And I therefore felt in a complete bind on the review board. I couldn't say it was, which I would be required to say, but I was kind of being told, well, the fact that it doesn't, you can't deny it. So the current situation, I think, is untenable. And that's part of why we are doing this work. We're trying to figure out how to take it from these kind of generalities that we really can't enforce in any way, it seems, to something that holds the developer to what we, the town, believe needs to happen. So looking forward, that's what we're trying to do as far as I'm concerned.
Mark?
So and I just want to, this is something that Guy repeatedly says, and that is that, when something, Velvet's here. When something comes to site plan review, it is an allowed use. The applicant has submitted an application for an allowed use. And the review process is about mitigating impacts of an allowed use. So I think that is an important thing to recognize, that I think it's important to recognize that as a feature of site plan review, what its function is and what it's doing.
But you can't make them do it.
Well, it's about mitigating impacts. So
But
if
they-
you want,
but they
if
say, "I
you
don't
if you
wanna."
want to make them do something, it's the wrong tool, is what I'm saying. That's my argument.
But they have to want to mitigate. If they don't want to, we're SOL, right?
Well, I think the review board does. I think it would be a matter of judgment, and I mean, I think the review board does have, you know, review authority to say that, so, noise impacts or visual impacts, that, they can use their judgment to say whether the developer has properly addressed those concerns.
I would
If the
recommend,
developer hasn't, then what?
I would recommend that at that point you consult with the town attorney to express,
Clarify it.
to clarify, the attempts that have been made and what you're, looking to accomplish. And whether there's a basis for rejecting the proposal on the basis of the developer's unwillingness to comply.
Irene, that is something that we do plan to do.
Well, but I mean on an individual basis, that when you bump up against that, if you've made, a reasonable effort to have a conversation and have cooperation with the developer, and the developer resists, that I think that at that point you can have a conversation with the attorney to determine next steps.
Ken, you had your hand up for a while. You're on mute.
Yes, I have a question about some of these. In long as we talked about here, number 21.
Well, Ken, I think we're not going to go through the details.
Our task is,
I think we'll save the details for next week. Right now,
our task is, okay, I'm not, what I'd like to say is that some of these don't pertain to the land use. This 21 seems to be a building, how a building is built. Is that what the site plan law is about?
That's what.
And we're to develop the,
Ken, I think that's what.
okay, if that's what site plan law is about, then some of these are okay, but our task is land use. And I don't see how some of them do and some of them don't pertain to that.
Greg, maybe we can switch back to your planned presentation, because I'm sure that's what you're going to talk about.
Sure, yeah. So, all right, we're talking about site plan review now, and so I'll just kind of stick on that subject. So just taking a step back, I'd like to just I just want to, at first, just for everyone, I want to define what a site plan is. Most people here know, but so it's in New York State Town Law, Section 274. So a site plan is a rendering, drawing, or sketch prepared to specifications and containing necessary elements as set forth in the zoning ordinance or local law, which shows the arrangement, layout, and design of the proposed use of a single parcel of land as shown on said plan. And so just using that definition, and the town board may, as part of a zoning ordinance or a local law, so again, we can either, this is part of the authority through a zoning ordinance or through a separate local law. We've talked about this before. Authorize the planning board or such other administrative body. So in this case, Caroline's site plan review board has been authorized by the town board to review and approve with modifications or disapprove site plans prepared to specifications set forth in the local law. Site plans shall show the arrangement, layout, and design of the proposed use of the land on said plan. The local law shall specify the land uses that require site plan approval and the elements to be included on site plans submitted for approval. The required site plan elements which are included in the local law may include, where appropriate, those related to parking, means of access, screening, signs, landscaping, architectural features, location, and dimension of buildings, adjacent land uses, and physical features meant to protect adjacent land uses, as well as any other additional elements specified by the town board in such local law. So just for everyone, that this is in, it's section 274 of Article 16 of New York State. And I had sent out these publications before. And so just take a look at that town law, page 66. So just starting from that sort of definition and then what the town board is authorized to do, we can, from there, that's where courts have sort of weighed in on what is appropriate and not. And so, for example, there hasn't been any courts cases about design, or I'm sorry, there is no law specified in town law about regulating aesthetics. However, it's been actually your attorney has a very good presentation, and Tim sent out the presentation to the task force. I encourage everyone to look at it because it does go over site plan review as well as, and it does mention how aesthetics they've been assumed to be a valid impact of development that can be regulated by a town. So, so that's site plan review. As Mark said, site plan review cannot prohibit uses. And so that's what zoning can do. And that's what the difference with maybe a zoning law or even a local law that might just ban a certain use. But I don't recommend the town go down that path. But zoning is a valid exercise to say use A is allowed over here, but use A is not allowed over here. So the site plan review essentially just provides a process for site plan development and what is required to be shown and impact that might happen as part of that site plan development. Ellen, looks like you have a question.
I thought previously you had said, while you can't without zoning say you can do it here, but you can't do it there, that there was an opportunity, and I don't know whether that's in the site plan review law or would be a separate law, to say, in total, we don't want to have it anywhere. I don't want billboards anywhere in town. And could that, that's what I understood, that we didn't have to have zoning to have something like that.
Yeah, as I just, that certainly can be adopted as a local law to prohibit a certain type of use.
Throughout.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to clarify, but what you're saying is the use cannot be prohibited in site plan review.
Correct. And yeah.
So Greg, in relationship to that, then you had parsed out a number of other items that were in the provisional design guidelines to be put back into site plan review or relocated elsewhere. Can you just speak generally to that? Because they seem to be related to energy, natural areas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think most people on this meeting here haven't seen my edits to the subcommittee's edits, but those we are going to be working on this week to send out a little bit later. But what Tim is asking me sort of what my kind of process about decipher is sort of parsing certain standards out into the site plan review law or keeping them in the design standards.
Which is also kind of what Ken was asking as well, I believe.
Sure. So I I think some of this too, it definitely needs more work. Part of this was my own was my own personal, or I'd say just professional opinion as what should be included in a design manual versus what should be included in site plan review. And as I said in the beginning of this sort of presentation, that I think they could be just part of one site plan review law. And that's when we heard from Mark about the reason why, and Irene about the reason they were parsed out in 2018 is to be able to modify design guidelines just by resolution of the board. So it was part of my own professional judgment to just decipher out certain things that should be in a site plan review law, such as there was a number of things relating to energy use requirements. And then my design standards, or I should say the design standards that I recommended, had to do with the massing of a building, the architectural features of a building, lighting, signage, landscaping, and even parking, down to just some of the more, what I believe to be a little bit more of the quantifiable kind of elements of design of a site plan. But yeah, these are all things that could be, I think, just need to have a little bit of a further discussion. And when I had sent that back to the subcommittee, it was not by any means my sort of, here's what I believe should absolutely happen. I think it does deserve a little bit more time. And I've had some sort of follow-up thoughts even too about certain things that might need to be expanded on, even certain things that might need to have more of guidelines. And I had some follow-up emails with you about, you know, we went from guidelines, set of questions, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which were standards. And I think there's some middle ground that we need to strike in order to have it be a little bit more appropriate. So some things I think can be quantified to say all developments need to be 50 feet from a property line. It could be specified such as that, or having things be a little bit more of a negotiation between the developer. It sounds like that is going to be a combination of what is legally allowed that the town is able to do, and just what the town wants to do for these site plans. It deserves more time.
Helen?
So I don't know what the full committee got. Did the full committee get the
No.
design standards? Okay. So I think it's important to bring them up to speed in the following, which is what Greg has suggested, and is that you guys have seen the standards that the subcommittee drafted, and they're very prescriptive. You got to have this and you can't do that, right? We took the questions and made them must statements. And what I'm hearing is that there's discomfort. One, that it feels awfully fast to do that many things. And two, that there's a lack of comfort on the part of Greg and probably Mark, I don't know, with making must, you got to do this and that statements as part of a revision of the design guidelines to make them standards. That's what I'm hearing. Greg had suggested that they could be incorporated into the site plan review law. The law currently has some standards. It has some things you got to do. And I think the suggestion was to take a lot of the, you got to do this and that, and put them in the site plan review law, which would go through public hearings, et cetera, et cetera. That what Greg has suggested would be left as design standards that we would propose as an amendment to go forward sooner rather than later. It seems to me that the site plan review law changes are going to take a while. That if it was a change in these quote standards, what Greg has suggested is that they would address building design in quite a lot of detail. A lot like what the Dryden and the Danby design guideline standards said. You know, can only use this kind of material, you got to have this kind of windows, your entrances have to be there, you got to, you know, lighting has to be certain ways, and then also site design things about parking, lighting, signage, landscaping. So basically having to do with what the site is going to look like and how you're going to lay out your building and your parking. I can understand that. I'm not clear to me whether that also really would require a public hearing, because it's going from guideline questions to what you got to do. So that's a question.
I think the board would probably be inclined to have a public hearing in that case.
Okay. I don't object to that, but I guess what I'm thinking is we partly are where we are at because a proposal was being not quite proposed, but talked about, that raised a lot of concerns for people in the town, tremendous number of concerns. And I guess my question is, would the design standards that Greg has put forward adequately addressed the concerns that people in the town had, that the 700 people who signed it? Are they a step forward enough for us to say, okay, let's do that, and then we can look further at other things? And I'm not sure I have the answer to that.
I just want to remind us that, just so we all remember, our charge isn't to address any particular project, to think broadly about site design across the town that would be uniform. So I just think it's really important that we keep that focus intact.
I agree. It was just that it brought up for us our concerns.
Right.
No, I was rereading our charge, and we're supposed to make recommendations and findings that will promote values and vision of the town. And it specifically calls out formula business restrictions, zoning laws, economic impact review laws, solar wind siting laws, and any other tools.
Is it okay with you? We have a couple of guests who would like to ask questions, and I think that given the flow of the conversation, that would be appropriate. Is that okay with everybody? So Catherine, you've had your hand up for a while.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I think Ellen addressed a bit. I guess my question was, and forgive me, I haven't been, hearing all of the good work you guys have been doing with the standards. Would those be enforceable, or would standards be any more enforceable than guidelines?
And Irene, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, I did, and it relates to what I had wanted to comment back to with Ellen's remarks as well, which is, and certainly we can check in with Guy about this, but my understanding again is that the site plan review law itself cannot establish as law things that don't exist as laws within the town, the county, or the state. So that it can reference them. And we have within the site plan law referenced and incorporated things, but I believe that it would have to reference existing laws somewheres.
I guess if I can jump in again, then, I mean, this is where I'm confused. And I think Ellen, I share the confusion that Ellen's expressed, which is, for example, if number 2 on the guidelines, which we all are familiar with them for many years now, like is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? That in no way falls into that kind of designation. It's not law, and like dark sky standards and all the things that are in there. I mean, none of those reference an established law, and yet so I remain confused about this.
And we do have adjacent towns that do have very particular design standards. And so
and Tim, I'm not familiar with those, but I wondered, are they backed up either in building code law or in town laws in those towns, or how are those referenced? Because I have a very clear recollection of conversations with Guy.
And Guy's actually reviewed them I mean, we've been in communication with Guy about those particular.
Okay.
Aren't those mostly adopted in zoning? The ones in Danby and Dryden?
Yes.
It could be that
Part
they're
of zoning.
Yeah.
So then that's the zoning law, so it now is in local law. Is that
Right.
what you're saying, Irene?
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm
So,
confused because our site plan review law includes some standards with numbers, what you got to do. And isn't that part of a law then, if it's in our site plan review law?
but the site plan review law can only reference existing other laws. It can't create, my understanding from, and and again, check into this. It's been a couple of years at least since we worked on the revisions, but my recollection is that the site plan law cannot itself establish new laws or requirements, that they have to be supported elsewhere in town, county, or state law.
If that's
Otherwise, they just become guidelines.
Okay.
Well,
I
Michelle,
think that's correct. So.
Yeah. Michelle.
Well, I guess it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if it's a new law, is that not itself the law? I mean, what's the point of the law? It's not a guideline in itself. It's a particular law that has particular, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so, but it just, in some of the reading you gave us at the beginning seemed to say, I thought, that towns can use site plan laws to control things. So I guess I would really want, it doesn't make sense to me, and it makes the whole, yeah, I'm really confused about what we're supposed to be doing, actually.
Well, no, I
if
mean,
what we're doing can't,
I mean,
you see what I'm saying?
Irene hasn't read the background that we're working with, and the state law background clarifies a distinction between zoning and local law as foundations for site plan review. And we've talked to different planners who have told us that there are two different arms for approaching this, which is why this group has proceeded in the direction that it has. And Barb, were you going to add something?
Well, I have just a clarifying point to make with regard to this. So just as an example, I mean, I understand what Irene is saying, that everything in the standards is supposed to link to an existing law. And that happens in some standards. And I'll give a short example in the existing standards. It says, for air quality, development plans shall comply with air quality standards set forth by New York State and the US EPA. Okay, so that's pretty clear. It's referencing existing regulations or legislation. But then the next one in the site plan review law is sound. And it says structures shall be located, constructed, and insulated to mitigate on-site noise. There's no reference to any law, local, state, or federal. So I'm just not understanding this. When you look at the standards, not every single standard is linked to a stated existing law. So I mean, that seems to, if that's the claim that's being made, that seems like it's a fundamental claim that guides what we do, and that's a claim that can be verified, is that required or not, with an attorney.
And frankly, if all we're doing is saying, are you complying with the law? What is the point?
Greg, it looked like you were going to say something.
No, I'm echoing what Barb just asked. That is the fundamental question, and I'm looking at. There's a few towns that don't have zoning in the area, and I've been that is a good way to look at this. Is that, are there other local laws that they are referencing? Because I'm looking at some site plan review laws currently that I can share with the group that I just pulled out today. That do establish things such as setbacks and parking area placements, but what I want to find is, are there local laws that those are already regulated by? And I apologize that I don't have kind of the the answer right here, but I think that it would just, it's a yes or no question from an attorney.
That's something that we can pursue.
Yeah, and it could well be that, we did what we could within the constraints of not having zoning. And if those other site plan laws come from towns with zoning, it could very well be that the basis for it was established in zoning.
Well, I'm looking at towns that don't have zoning. There's only a few. But,
okay.
Yeah. And so I'm trying to find when they require a dimensional standard or something in their site plan review law, is it, regardless of whether it's referenced to a local law or not, is it actually established via a local law? And so I want to find that out by the night's end, at least after this call.
Which we will be able to do. So I think that there are two directions for us to go in. One immediate direction is just a blanket clarification from Guy Crow regarding his understanding of site plan review in relationship to whether we can add prescriptions that are not grounded in town law. I'd rather us wait and have our finished document before having him do Picayune-ish review of the whole thing, but I think it would be helpful for us to have that opinion. And then at the same time, I think we should keep working on the document, because whether the language ends up being prescriptive or suggestive, I think already the work that you've all done on the design standards themselves are so much better than what we already have, that it would be helpful to continue in that direction. The other thing that we still need to do as a group, which would involve more than this one subcommittee, is I think we need a better declaration of what economic review would entail and what the background for it is, what the basis for it would be. I think we've covered the business standards, and I think that that subcommittee already in terms of commercial business, formula business, we've already kind of determined that we should recommend that the town consider some kind of zoning in relationship to that, but we're not going to fold that as a law into this. I think we already determined that as a committee. Does this sound reasonable to everybody? Ellen, you had your hand up again. You're shaking your head no.
So I agree with going forward with, we've put a lot of work into things that we think are important for the town to deal with. And frankly, we've talked about putting them in the site plan review law, but maybe they have to stand as a separate law, right? Maybe we have a separate law that deals with formula business. We could do that, right?
Yes.
And so whether we have
told by
fold
other
it in-
attorneys that we can do that.
So formula business is something we've talked a lot about. We've talked about putting in the site plan review law, size different from what's currently there. We've talked about requirements for what it might look like, et cetera. So that could be a separate law in which we say, whatever it is we want to be saying. So part of me is agreeing with you, Tim, that we can go forward with the content, what we want to see happen. Personally, I'm not very interested in making more detailed questions. I'm on the review board. It's not satisfying to just ask questions. I just don't get it. Doesn't make sense to me. So I'm interested in finding ways that things that we think must happen to get them to happen. And it may not be in the site plan review law is what I'm hearing. Okay, we can put it elsewhere. And it doesn't have to be zoning either. It can be, I would assume, some standalone laws that address protecting agriculture in the town. What has to happen? I don't know, but I'm not happy with thinking we're going to end up with some more mushy questions.
Other thoughts?
I had one.
agree with Ellen.
Barbara?
Yeah, I agree with what Ellen just said. I think on the economic development side, we're further back. We really have to think more about what economic impact assessment ought to be like for the town. You know, what are the town's goals? Because economic impact assessment can be just a very arcane kind of economistic tool. We have to think about what it is we care about. And then the other thing we're going to have to think about is what we know about the economy of the town of Caroline. And that calls for a very different kind of exercise before thinking about law.
One of the things, Barbara, that I know that Greg is researching is what kind of how one would determine a baseline. What would be involved in determining a baseline for an economic review, which really is ground zero in terms of even beginning to think about this.
A baseline can be about anything. And I think there are priorities that have to be set. What do you include? What data do you collect and what data do you not collect?
Yeah, yes.
That's
to go in that direction, also the town board would have to budget for a study that would do this to begin with, for which we need greater information. Right. Bill, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. So on the economic impact review, yes, it might be that the first time one needed to actually be done, that would be when, you know, the applicant has to pay for the assessment. I think the real question is, that might be when the baseline gets established, as opposed to the town having to fork over money now, when they might never actually wind up needing to do that study. So I'm not sure. The question I had in the context of the discussion we just had, in the proposed triggers that went out, there's also a proposed cap of 10,000 square feet that no development can be larger than that. So in the context of not being able to ban in site plan, does this require a town law that says there shall be no developments larger than 10,000 square feet in the town of Caroline, as opposed to being something that is in the site plan review law?
Yes.
Yes, takes a town law.
Yeah, or through zoning. And I didn't even comment on that. I wanted to get to just parsing out what I believe were design standards with the site plan review law, but that was another topic to bring up. Yep.
And this doesn't mean that something like that couldn't be accomplished either through a standalone law or through zoning. Which is we realize that that's a longer term process, but it might be perhaps it would be a more all-inclusive process. That's a question. That's a question. Our plan was to have this conversation and then pause to have the subcommittee do some more detailed work. What is the subcommittee's feeling about this right now?
I think we have some questions that it would be useful to talk over with Tim, Greg, and Mark or you know, whoever is the appropriate group to figure out what our next direction should be.
Right. So I mean, my proposal is that I think it's been helpful to get all this this out in the air, but I think now it would be helpful for just a subcommittee to step aside with us, and we'll go over some of these details with the aim of distributing next week something concrete to the entire task force that's been revised and that we can discuss with the kind of detail that Ken pointed us to at the beginning in terms of going through particular items. I kind of didn't want to do that tonight based on a revised document that not everybody would have had time to look at, as well as the realization through Greg that document probably would want to be tweaked before we do this anyway. So what I propose that we do tonight is finish the task force meeting, and that the subcommittee go into private executive session and do some more detailed work. Everyone in agreement with that? We'll meet again next Monday, and we'll be sending you documents and a game plan this week. And we hope that you all profit from this free hour that some of us won't have tonight. And take a deep breath, and thanks a lot.